Thank you for joining me in my garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television in Norfolk, Massachusetts. We're in my herb garden this morning, and it is now November, mid-November, and it's chilly this morning. It was very warm last week, unseasonably warm, in the 70s, but now our temperatures have become more seasonal. And it's time to really finish getting ready for winter. The herb garden is covered in oak leaves, and I'm going to leave those there for the winter. They provide a light mulch. I do take them off the lawn, but I will be leaving them on my gardens to provide a nice, cozy little mulch. And I also leave the stems of the herbs because many beneficial insects like to hide in there in the wintertime. So we'll just leave them until spring, and then we'll worry about it then, when it's a little nicer outside too. I can still pick a few herbs. Oddly enough, there are some things that you can still pick. One of them will be sage, and we certainly can get enough sage to put in our Thanksgiving meal, and also thyme. And I have some different kinds of thyme. This is just a regular English thyme. And we can pick that also. And along with the lovage that I dried from the vegetable garden this summer, we have a nice collection of herbs to put with our poultry for our Thanksgiving meal. All of the labels of the herbs have been removed. I'm going to depend on my memory next spring when I replace them in the garden. Most of them are old, familiar herbs. Anything that was new this year, I would have left the label so that I would be able to identify it and its location next year. We still have some of the herbs that stay green all year, and that includes lavender, and we don't cut that back until spring. Even the ornamental lavenders still stay here in the garden, and again get covered with leaves, or I'll show you another way to protect a more tender variety of lavender as we get around to the perennial garden. All of the decorative items have also been moved as well, and any plants that were in clay pots have either been removed and planted or composted or taken into the house for the winter. Now let's move over to the perennial garden and see what we can do there to finish our preparation. Okay, in the perennial garden, I have left many of the stems, but not all. There are a few plants that I do cut back, and that would include irises. They don't like to be wet over the winter, and if you leave the foliage on, that just encourages a lot of wetness and possible disease. So I do cut down all of the iris. I do leave the grasses and many of the other things with pods. These are asters. They have seeds in the blossoms that the chickadees and the other little birds really love. I need to winterize a few of the plants in my garden, and that would be roses for one. And each of the roses, especially as the ground starts to freeze, will get a mound of compost around the base. And I'll just go through the garden, and any rose will get compost. I'll probably also do it to some of my newer clematis plants to see if that will help them through the winter. This will provide food in the spring when I pull it back from the base of the roses. But each rose, this is all I do with my roses, and I don't trim them back. The proper time to prune roses is not in the fall, it's in the spring. So unless you have some climbing roses with long whipping pieces that really have to be cut for safety, just leave them alone. Climbing roses need to be tied to their supports, so you don't have pieces that fly around in the wind and break and shred at the ends. So you can tie those up well before winter. And again, I'll put compost at the base of the climbing roses too. Some plants stay green all winter. And some plants stay green a long time. And here we have a primrose, and that's staying pretty green, and I'll make sure there's a few leaves over that. And this is a coral bell, and it will probably not stay green all winter. And you have to watch those to make sure that they don't pop up out of the ground later on in the winter. Some plants actually put up new green as fall arrives. And one of those is an oriental poppy, and it's putting up new green leaves. And because if you thought it was just because of the warm weather, it isn't. It's a normal thing for them to put on foliage, and it will put on more foliage in the spring, but it's perfectly normal in the fall. The other green that we see under the rose would be grape hyacinths, and they're a bulb that will bloom in blue in the spring. They'll put on foliage now. They'll put on more foliage in the spring when they bloom. I see that I've had a deer in here, so I need to get out with the deer spray. And the deer kind of eat these like grass, but it doesn't seem to influence their blooming in the spring. They'll come up again in the spring. So we don't worry about it too much, but I really don't want them to get used to eating in my garden. Now let's move over to the other side. We have some other plants that need a little extra care for fall. I need to protect the lavenders and chrysanthemums. Yes, chrysanthemums can be perennial, and these are chrysanthemums that I planted in the spring, probably 5 or 6 years ago, and you can see they're putting up new foliage as well down at the base. I don't cut them back at this point, but I will cover them and just kind of wind around the foliage under a bushel basket filled with oak leaves. Oak leaves don't mat down, and they will protect the plant over the winter. And I'll just put a rock on top. And I'll do the same thing with this lavender. And again, I collect old bushel baskets for this purpose, and they'll just stay there all winter with their rocks over them. The other thing you can do in the perennial garden, I have several more lavenders to cover and several more roses. So it's best to do this after the ground freezes. So I'll probably leave these, but wait a little bit longer. We're supposed to have another very cold spell towards the mid to end of the week. So at that point, when the ground starts to freeze, it's time to finish protecting the plants. You actually, instead of keeping the plants from freezing, want to keep them from freezing and thawing as the temperature fluctuates during the winter. You'd like them to stay just uniformly cold. Another thing I'll be doing out here is picking things that I want to use in my holiday arrangements. And this is a red twig dogwood. And as you can see, it has lovely red twigs. And one of the things that it benefits from is being cut way back every year. And this is a good time to do it. If not now, in the spring. But I'll be cutting pieces of red twig dogwood to be used in flower arrangements inside and outside. The other thing I might choose are just some branches that fall. These can be painted and used in arrangements. And then I'll pick a few other things from the garden. These came from other spots in the garden, but I have some mixed evergreens, pine, and holly, and a plant that grows in the shade called Leucothwaite. And the Leucothwaite is also evergreen and works very well in winter arrangements. Again, both indoors and outdoors. Magnolias are evergreen, but they have a habit of curling up when it's really cold. So they really aren't the greatest in outdoor arrangements, and they don't last much at all in indoor ones. Another thing to pick will be the Sedum Autumn Joy. I've left that, the seed heads, and I'll just remove the leaves and use these And if you don't like the brownish color, you can always spray paint them. Gold, silver, red. They take to spray paint very well, as do the sticks. I've removed most of my plant supports from the garden. Here's one last one to be removed. And I've stacked these over by my garden area to be put out again next spring. Now let's head down to the vegetable garden where we have some picking and preparations for winter to be done. The vegetable garden has been pretty well cleared of vegetables, vegetable matter. We planted some garlic last month and it hasn't really come up. We've got it covered with straw for mulch. And I have strawberries next to it. And I'll be mulching those with, once the ground freezes, with some of this salt marsh hay. And I'll also put another section of it on the on the garlic. So the garlic and strawberries will get mulched with that, and also some of the parsley. But I still have a little section here of things to pick. And one of those things is some carrots, which I can dig up and just loosen them with the fork and then pull them up. I don't have great luck with carrots, but we usually get enough to enjoy around this time of year. And I'll just put those in my basket. I'm still getting plenty of kale, and I can just trim that. And I've frozen all that I want to freeze, so any that we want to eat right now, I will come out and pick. Remove any of the bad leaves, but the kale is excellent, and it becomes sweeter after a frost. The next thing are Brussels sprouts, and I had good luck with my Brussels sprouts this year. I lost them to the rabbits last year. That wasn't so good. But this year, I kept the rabbits out, and we have stems of Brussels sprouts. You've probably seen these in the grocery store, the whole stem without the leaves. So I will also take the leaves off and then pop each little sprout off and put it in my colander to bring in the house. The stem is very tough, doesn't compost too well, so it'll go in with in the brush pile that'll be burned later on. But we'll just pull all of these off and add them and have them ready to cook. I have a few leeks here. They didn't do extremely well, but we have enough to add some flavor to a few dishes. And again, we'll put those in the basket with the other roots. And then there's parsnips. They're at their best after a frost. So they take a very long time in the garden. But the roots are ready now to be picked. And again, these will be washed well and cooked. And we're going to actually cook some of these inside today, along with some Brussels sprouts. And again, you need to loosen the soil. And the trick is to be far enough away that you loosen the soil around them, but you don't push your fork right through the root itself. Because I have rocks in the garden, I get some with roots that have divided over a rock, but they can still be washed and consumed. The other crop we have to still pick is arugula, and that is good in salads and on sandwiches. You'll find it in the fancier restaurants and also in my garden. It's a dependable crop, and we have it in the garden from early spring right on through winter. All of these things withstood the 5 inches of snow we had late last month. The other crop that I have in the garden is parsley. And you can see that I have both the curled parsley, some of it's turning a little yellow, and the Italian parsley flat leaf. And those I keep picking and bringing into the house and putting in glass jars in the refrigerator as I use it. And I will put some of the salt marsh hay over this. And I can expect at least the curled parsley to come up next spring. Depending on the season, we may get the Italian parsley. It seems to be a little less hardy than the curled parsley, so I always plant both. So I know I'll have some early next spring. Because parsley is a biennial, that means it comes up from seed the first year, and then it goes to sleep, and then it comes up again the second year. And after that, it will go to seed. So I will have parsley early in the spring, but I'll also plant more seeds next year to keep the cycle going. Don't pull your parsley if you haven't already. Just be sure to leave it, and you'll get a very nice early crop in the spring. A lot of people just pull it up and throw it away thinking it's just an annual, but it's not. Its life cycle is 2 years. Actually, many vegetables have a life cycle of several years, but many of them are also killed by the frost. Parsley tends to be a little hardier and sticks around for that second year. Now let's head to the backyard. I've cleared out my containers that held annuals. They all went when we got our snow and our colder weather. And I've cleared out my window boxes and stacked my chairs. These don't quite fit in the house, so they have to stay out all winter. And I'm ready to fill these containers with evergreens for winter. It's a little cheery to put in some evergreens and the pods and the things that we picked earlier out in the vegetable garden and others that I will pick and show you later. And then you can accent it with some Christmas decorations, ribbons, whatever you'd like, lights. It just makes things a little more festive than leaving empty pots. Again, the big pots I leave out. They're made of fiberglass or plastic material. Ceramic pots I do put into the garden shed. I empty them and put them away. But the larger ones I leave out, and I'll fill those with greens, and it'll be a little more seasonal and something to look at. This is an oak leaf hydrangea, and one of the reasons I like it is because of the beautiful colors its leaves turn in the fall. And these leaves can be pressed and used inside as table decorations on your Thanksgiving table. They last forever once they've been pressed into a book, and they do hold their color quite nicely. It will lose all of its leaves, and I will either remove these blooms now or in the spring when I do the spring cleanup. But it's an all-over lovely plant, oak leaf hydrangea, and it likes shade to part shade, and it's very happy in this little corner. And it's a plant I like enough that I purchased another one to put out in the back so that I'll have more than one. The blooms, incidentally, are white, and it comes also in smaller varieties. This is just the straight variety oak leaf hydrangea, but there are some cultivars that are shorter if you're looking for a nice plant that has beautiful fall foliage. Now let's move further into the back in the shade garden. Down in the shade garden, I again am leaving the leaves on the majority of the plants, but I am clearing the paths because I do go to the garden shed throughout the winter. I keep a lot of craft supplies in there. So I need to have a path to get there, which brings up these sticks, which will tell me when it snows where the path is so that I don't run the snowblower into all of the plants that are here. You can see the green of the hellebores, and they stay green all winter. I have a lot of things that stay green most of the winter. I really enjoy seeing some green. You see the leucothwae in the background, the periwinkle as a ground cover, and these hellebores, which will bloom very early spring. And their foliage eventually will go, but not for quite a while. They stay green a long time. I do go through, I have a lot of hosta back here, And I do go through and pull the dead hosta leaves. And if I've had a lot of trouble with slugs, which love hosta, these generally you can, once they start to turn, just pull out. But they're a little unsightly. They get wet. And if you've had a lot of trouble with slugs, after you've gotten the foliage away, you might want to leave the area open so that you don't have the slugs hiding under the leaves for the winter. This gives you a little head start on spring. And by opening it up, you can see where the hostas are in the spring when it's time to fertilize them and put on some slug deterrent. Now, the pond. I've cleaned up around the fish pond, and I'm still giving them some food that's designed for spring and fall because the water is still quite warm after the really warm weather we had last week. It will be cooling down this week, and very shortly I'll just stop feeding the fish. You can tell when they start moving very, very slowly that the water is cold. Right now they're still pretty frisky, so I will continue giving them some food. We also have some frogs in there, and you'll notice I've taken the net off, so I have to have the net handy to scoop out any of the leaves that do fall in. Most of the leaves are off the trees, but occasionally some of them blow in. And I won't get all of them out, but I try to get as many out as I can with the net. I left the large net over the pond until the leaves were down. One year I left it on all winter. I thought, oh, that'd be a good idea. It was not a good idea because the snow weights the net down, at which point it all falls into the pond, and it's a real mess. So taking the net off has been my strategy ever since. This is a pond heater, or pond thermal pond, and it is a heating unit that goes into the pond, and I am going to put it in now because we are starting to get some freezing nights. The idea of this is to keep a hole in the ice that forms, and you plug it in. It has a thermostat on it, so when it's not below freezing, it doesn't work. It'll only work when it's below freezing, which saves on electricity. And that will stay in the pond all winter and keep a hole in the ice when the ice does form. This allows gases from decomposing fish waste and leaves to vent up through the top of the pond so they don't collect and kill the fish. I've also left my heron out. This is the season that I lost all my fish about 5 years ago. I also have put a tile in the bottom of the pond, a flue tile, and a 2-foot piece of flue tile to give them a little hiding spot. But unfortunately, now that the leaves are off the tree, any heron flying over can see the fish in the water as well as we can, and is apt to come down and have a quick meal. I lost all my fish in a matter of about an hour. They were there in the morning, and by afternoon they were gone. So I have instituted these policies. Supposedly they see the decoy heron and decide that they don't want to impinge on his territory and stay away. So far it's worked for the last couple years, so we'll hope it continues. Of course, the net would keep them out, but again, when there's snow, there's a problem with the net. So we'll hope the heron and the hiding place work to keep the fish in the pond. They are not expensive koi, they are goldfish, so if we do lose them, replacing them was not a large financial burden at all. Now let's go up and check what's going on the patio. The annual plants that were in this garden along the house were taken out and some spring bulbs planted. In fact, I've planted quite a few spring bulbs, so I'm anxious to see them come up next spring. And the plants have been replaced by bird feeders, and we just had a bird buzz us here. I'll probably be right down. they've been very hungry. I've also put up a bird feeder where I had a hanging plant this summer, and I've had to fill it almost daily. They are hungry. And now that the weather has changed and it's a little cooler, I'm going to put in some suet cakes, and I buy these at the garden store. And the woodpeckers particularly love those. So we will enjoy having some of the woodpeckers come. We have red-bellied woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, hairy woodpeckers, and an occasional pileated woodpecker. So we'll enjoy watching those all winter from inside. And it will take almost daily, maybe every other day, filling the feeders all winter. But it's easy enough to do, and it provides enjoyment. And I want to keep those birds around for next year's garden so that they can help with pest control. They really do a good job, and I enjoy watching them too. So feeding the birds is something that's nice to do, and I've enjoyed doing it for many years, and it doesn't take long for them to find the feeder once you put it up. Now let's go inside and prepare some food for Thanksgiving. Much of our gardening in the next few months is going to be done inside instead of outside. And we took some cuttings in September, and I wanted to show you how they came out. I put 3 pieces in each of these little pots, and many of them grew. In fact, most of them did. I always try a few things that might not work, and again, I had a few that did not, but most of them did. This is a coleus, a geranium, and this is a mizzou, which is a succulent. And all of these have rooted. If you pull slightly, you'll realize that they're rooted down pretty well. And with 3 in each pot, by the time they can be planted out next April or May, they're going to get way too big for the pot if I leave 3 in each one. So in the next few months, I'm going to be going through these and using the bigger ones first, transferring 2 from each of these into another pot. And so I'll have 3 pots of each of these. And this will involve putting them in trays to keep. The other thing I'll do this winter with each of these is to find the center and then pinch out any growing tips as they start. This causes the plant to branch so that we'll have some nice fat branched plants to plant next spring. Now let's make a Thanksgiving arrangement. I'm going to make a Thanksgiving arrangement. I have a cornucopia basket, and I usually use this at Thanksgiving. There's not much other excuse to use it, so Thanksgiving's a good time. I've soaked a piece of green foam, the Oasis, and it's wet, so I wrapped a little foil around it. I cut it to fit in the back of this container. And then I went outside and picked a bunch of things from the garden to help fill it. You can use most anything. Flowers from the grocery store or florist, or the things that you pick in your own yard. And I did pick some leaves that I want to use. And this is a couple of the leaves that have turned red I thought would be pretty on my table. And I'll cut those to fit and start putting them in. I also have some leaves that are more gold, and they'll add to it as well. I want to make a framework with the berries. This is blueberry, and again, we want to make that shorter. The idea is to cover the Oasis with things that you have from the garden. And the dark red is Itea, which is a shrub, which gets lovely dark leaves every fall. It's one of the reasons we plant it. And then I have some other pieces, again, of blueberry. Itea. And then we have some Autumn Joy sedum, which is dried. And I can add that in, again, to help fill it up. This one seems a little shattery. We've got it. And I have a few florist flowers. And I thought I might use gold, but I think I'll use the Alstroemeria, which lasts quite a while. And that's the one, that and the leaves are the ones we need the oasis for. Just poke that right in there. And I have to take a look at it every once in a while, see how it's doing. And I also have a Snapdragon that can go in. And I'll put that in at some point over here, I think. Keep it going in this direction. And then we can also add some red berries. And this is winterberry. And maybe a few more of these. Dried flowers. Just to kind of fill in. And then if you wish, you can add some fruit. And sometimes you need to add a pick to add the fruit. So you could just put the pick in and then stick that into the oasis as well. If you wanted to add an apple. And maybe I'll add a nectarine down at this point. Brighten it up a little bit. And maybe a little Indian corn along the edge on each side, and a pear on this side, just down at the base. So there we've made a nice little centerpiece. It's low enough that you can see your dinner guests over the top of the table. Always an important consideration. And it has some interest on both sides. Not a lot, so it would be better probably to put this on a buffet. It definitely has one set of areas where it's best. So there's our centerpiece. And now we'll go into the kitchen and do some cooking for Thanksgiving. I have a feeling that a lot of our Thanksgiving celebrations are going to be a little bit smaller this year due to COVID-19. I know mine is. Usually we have a large family gathering, but this year it's going to be very small. Nonetheless, I want to have a celebration and make some of the regular things that I've made in the past for Thanksgiving dinners, just on a smaller scale. One of the things that we always have is a special mashed potato dish, and this year I'm going to make it. Usually I make 2 or 3 recipes to feed a crowd. This year I'm making half a recipe. However, I'm going to give you the ingredients for a full recipe which will serve 4. If you only have 2 at your table, like I do, then you'll make a half recipe instead. I'm going to start out with, for 4, we would use 2 pounds of potatoes. And those potatoes have been peeled, cut up, and cooked. And till they're very done, I test them with a fork to make sure they're really soft. I've also drained out all the water. Now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of butter and a 1/4 cup of milk. And we're going to beat that together until they're nice and smooth. Pretty good. I want to get it all off the beaters if we can. special ingredients. It would be a cup of sour cream, a cup of cottage cheese, you won't know it's there once they're baked. It just adds some nice flavor and richness. 1 egg, and we like some green onions, probably about 5, chopped up. I'll mix this all together. This can be prepared in advance the day before. That means you won't have to be peeling potatoes the morning of Thanksgiving. Make it the day before and kept in your casserole dish in the refrigerator to be baked in a 350 oven shortly before serving. I'm going to put them in the casserole dish. There is salt in the cottage cheese, but if you wish to add more, you can taste the mixture before you add the egg and add a little more salt if need be. Now, to make it a little special on top, I have a 1/4 cup of breadcrumbs, and I've melted a tablespoon of butter, and I'll mix that around so they're buttered crumbs. And then I'm going to put these along the edge of the casserole. And these will be going into the refrigerator until it's shortly before dinner time, and they will reheat at 350 degrees for about a half an hour, and they'll get slightly browned on top and very creamy and delicious. The next thing I'm going to make are some vegetables, and I'm using garden vegetables, and we're using parsnips, which I've put on a foil covered plate. I've brushed these well with a brush as I washed them, and the Brussels sprouts have been cleaned as well. I've put the Brussels sprouts on a foil covered pan, and I'm going to drizzle those with a little of the olive oil. Probably about half a tablespoon for this number. And you can season those with salt and pepper, or any of the other seasonings you might want. We like the Mrs. Dash seasonings. This one is garlic and herb. That would be good on them as well, a little of it. The foil helps with your cleanup chores after dinner. The next thing I'm going to do with the Brussels sprouts is add some balsamic vinegar, 1 tablespoon of that, and 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And some salt and pepper. Both the parsnips and Brussels sprouts will last really well in the garden, as I said earlier, but we're getting to the point where you want to get them picked before we get really horrible weather. And these will be put on the baking sheet as well. These will go in at 375 and they will bake for about 20 minutes to 30 minutes. Now that we've made a few side dishes to go with our Thanksgiving entree, it's time to think about dessert. Typically on Thanksgiving, pies are the order of the day for many families, and my family is no exception. And we usually have 2 or 3 different kinds: apple, pecan, pumpkin, sometimes even chocolate. But with a small Thanksgiving, we really don't need 3 or 4 pies in the house for 2 or 3 people, or even 4 people. That would be a lot of pie, but we would like some variety, so I'm this year going to make tarts, and they're small pies, and I'm going to start by making the crust, and this is a very easy crust, and I'm using a 1/2 cup butter and 3 ounces of cream cheese, and I'm going to mix that in the mixer. They were both softened so that they're easy to mix, and then add 1 cup of flour. This is going to make 24 little tarts or pies. And I'll mix that until it forms a ball. I'll need to scrape it down at least once to get it all incorporated. High butter and cream cheese content, you really don't have to worry about over mixing this as you do with a traditional pie crust. It will stay tender and brown up nicely. Make sure this is in a ball, in the mixing bowl, before take it out and put it on a piece of plastic wrap. And I'm going to put this in the refrigerator for at least a half an hour. You can put it in a little longer, though you may need to let it soften when it comes out. Now, after they've been in the refrigerator, we can form them into little crusts in mini muffin pans. And you don't need to grease them. Again, there was enough butter and cream cheese in the dough that they won't stick badly at all. If they stick at all, you can just run a knife around them and they should pop right out. I divided the dough in half and then formed it into 1-inch balls. And each 1-inch ball then is just spread with the thumb until it fills the cup. Then we need to make some filling for this. And I'm going to make both pumpkin and pecan. Each of my recipes has ingredients that make enough batter for 24 little pies or tarts. However, because I want 2 different kinds, I'm cutting the recipes in half. I'm going to give you the ingredients for the full 24, and you can cut it in half yourself or make all 24. You might want to make 48 or even more. But the first one we're going to do is pumpkin, and for the pumpkin, I am putting in 1 egg and a 1/2 cup of canned pumpkin, 1/3 cup of sugar, and a half teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice, a quarter cup of sour cream, and a tablespoon of milk, and I've mixed those together in my dish. And now we mix this all together until it's thoroughly combined. And this is our pumpkin filling. And then I will proceed to fill each of the little tarts about 3/4 full with the pumpkin mixture. They will puff up a little bit in the oven, so you need to allow for that. Continue filling these. Once we've baked these, they can be served with a little cream cheese frosting on top, or perhaps a little whipped cream if you want to make them a little fancier than they are already. Or you can just leave them plain and have little pumpkin pie tarts. We spilled a little, which I need to get out of the pan before it burns. There. Those will be ready to go in the oven. And now we'll make some pecan tarts too. And I've started with 3/4 cup of brown sugar. And I'm going to add to that an egg. A 1/3 cup of dark corn syrup. Again, these are pecan pie ingredients. A teaspoon of vanilla. 2 tablespoons of melted butter. And 2/3 cup of pecans. And this gets stirred together until everything is well mixed. The other thing you can do is put the pecans into the cups first and then put on the brown sugar mixture. I've mixed this already in it. The pecans will come to the top as these bake. And these do puff up quite a bit, so you don't want to fill them too full. That we spilled. Take a little from that one and add it to this one. These are going to go into a 325-degree oven for about 30 minutes until the crusts are brown and the pies are done. I'll see you in the dining room when everything's finished and we're ready for our small Thanksgiving meal. And here we have our Thanksgiving dinner on a small scale this year. We'll be meeting our friends and relatives later on Zoom for a family get-together, but our meal will be here in our house, just the two of us. So, in addition to a chicken that I've cooked, instead of a turkey this year, we have our vegetables from the garden, Brussels sprouts and parsnips, and our mashed potatoes, casserole that was in the refrigerator for a while before we cooked it and can be made a day ahead, and our mini pies, pumpkin and pecan. Incidentally, these freeze well, so if you make several different kinds, you can freeze them for later use. Other options for fillings would include some apples and also brownie mix or brownie batter. You can put a little of that in each of these little crusts and have little individual pies. We also made a floral arrangement with things we have around the house for the most part, and a few flowers from the grocery store. And we're ready to be thankful. 2020 has been a challenging year for many people, but I think we can all find something to be thankful for. And I'm thankful for NCTV for allowing me to share some of the things that I enjoy, both in my garden and in my kitchen. And I hope you'll find something to be thankful for as well. You've been watching A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Station. Have a blessed Thanksgiving.